Okay. So, hi, I'm Helen Partlow. I'm an attorney at Waypoint Immigration, and I specialize in NIW applications. So, we're going to talk about that today. If anyone has any questions along the way, you can just put it into the comments and we will get to it at the end. So the NIW, just a quick recap, is the National Interest Waiver. It's the EB-2 Second Preference application. This is self-sponsored. You do not need a company to sponsor you. You can bring the application on your own. It does not grant you any sort of status, so you would have to wait until your priority date would become current before you could get your green card and therefore come and work in America. You can already be in America, obviously, on a different status, but you would have to maintain that status up until the point where you get your green card. And no matter where you are in the world, no matter what country you were born in, there is a backlog for everybody. So it's not just from those from China and India, although theirs is infinitely longer, especially India, than people in other countries. So there is definitely like a long-term planning involved if you are here, if you want to be here sooner. So you'd have to look at other options. We would say about 3 to 5 years on average for people not from the specific countries in the visa bulletin, from the rest of world area. But anyway, so the NIW is all about showing how you will impact America. So we don't want to know necessarily how are you going to impact a company here or your employer if you are already here, because that's obvious and that's kind of internal and that's just helping their own bottom line. We want to know how are you going to help America as a whole, or at least regionally, some sort of section of the country. So this is all about sharing how your impact goes beyond your company. How are you being impactful? Are you doing work in like different activities outside of your work? Or is your work showing some sort of real impact beyond the company? How you're helping raise like industry standards or being innovative? If you're doing research and you're helping further the field, doesn't have to just be research and doesn't have to just be industry. You know, there's different pathways. Some people even are entrepreneurs and they start a company, and it makes sense for the EB-2 NIW in that way as well. But a lot of this application is supported by reference letters. So there's the 3 different prongs of DANASAR. The first is substantial merit and actual importance. The second is that you are well positioned to do your proposed endeavor, which is your future plan. And the third one is a balancing test, saying how you're not going to harm the American workforce if you go through this application. So these letters kind of help strategically support each of these prongs in different ways. The first prong, substantial merit and actual importance, is definitely much more supported by objective third-party evidence, research done, showing different national reports, federal guidance, and like, you know, legislative actions or executive actions, things like that. But it can still have some relevance for a reference letter to show how your work does extend beyond your company. Then the second prong, how you are well positioned to do your proposed endeavor. This is where we definitely get into more of the nitty-gritty support from the reference letters, and they're showing how you have the capability, you have the skills, you have the education, the experience to continue to be impactful in the future. And then there is some support, but definitely not as much in the third prong, showing how you won't hurt the labor market and how what you're doing is urgent and really needed in America and that sort of a thing. But again, that third prong is supported similarly to the first prong by outside research and things like that. The second prong is where it really is heavily dependent upon what documents you as the applicant can provide in your application. If you're filing on your own or with an attorney or whoever, that is really where all of your documents come into play. And that's where a lot of the strength can lie in showing all of these different things. So you should definitely have objective evidence to supply, you know, different emails and support, projects that you've done, proof of all of these things. But to kind of help tell the story and how to say how you are impactful and how to kind of tie it all together, we like the reference letters because they can really kind of bring it together and tell how these things make sense for your specific profile, your industry, your accomplishments, and how it relates to the NIW. So the reference letters should absolutely be as detailed and specific as possible. You should not just have someone say, oh, yes, this person is a hard worker and they're great. Like that doesn't really give us anything to work with. That's just too generic, too, definitely there's nothing really of there of substance. So we definitely want to have things of substance within the letters. If you have something like, like a letter, I mean, when I'm talking about reference letters, I'm saying like these kind of letters that really help support things, but you can have other letters too that aren't these types. Like you can have employment verification letter that just says that you worked at this company. You can have a letter that just confirms that you were a judge on something. You can have a letter that confirms that you were like a peer reviewing or a membership, that you are accepted into a membership. So those are letters, but they're not really the kinds of letters that I'm talking about as far as your reference letters. To me, those letters are more like confirming that you have these positions, and they're not really telling us too much more other than confirming that you did do these activities. These reference letters that we like to do for EB-2 NIW goes beyond that. So these are letters that as a firm, we write them. And then we have, we send it to our clients and the clients get them signed. But I'm definitely looking for more in these letters that we're writing. So there's different kinds of letters. There are the letters that you would get from your employer that would talk about the projects you're working on, what your role is, how is it impactful, how is it impactful beyond your company. So with a work-related letter, I kind of have a standard formula. I check the top. We like to have a company template. A company letterhead on the top, make sure it's dated. Usually it says like, to immigration officer or to whom this may concern, or, a varying kind of a salutation at the top. Then the person should introduce themselves. So whoever is signing this letter should, say, my name is Helen Partlow. I'm an attorney at Waypoint Immigration. I have, a Juris Doctorate from this school. I've had these kind of accomplishments, kind of setting up the officer to know that this person has a commanding voice, that they have the knowledge and, the knowledge to kind of make an opinion on you and your work and things like that. So it's just like a brief paragraph introduction to the person that is signing it. Then we also want to make sure that we're telling the officer how you know them. If they're your manager, your supervisor, if you happen to have like, if maybe it's an independent letter that this person doesn't know you and maybe you met at a conference or like through some sort of professional activity you did, you want to make sure that you're telling the officer that relationship with you and the person. Then, it depends upon the letter, but then, we definitely like to chime in as to the specific projects. And that's really where the bulk of the letter comes from. Typically, I like to talk about 1 or 2 projects that you've done in incredible detail, maybe a third project, but definitely would want to determine which project should be the focal point of the letter and which ones would be more like a supportive angle. So you're not like focusing too much, because you don't want the letters to get too long. They're not the application. They're in support of your application. These are going to be exhibits. They're evidence. They're not the actual petition letter. So, want to make sure that we're not writing it in that way, because we are writing a petition letter too. So they're all complementary. They're all different puzzle pieces of your overall application. So each individual puzzle piece should come together and show the USCIS officer that, oh, yes, this person does qualify and it will be impactful and it should make sense to approve this person. So that's where you're really thinking of, everything you are presenting is a puzzle piece of that overall puzzle. And when you look at it all in detail, it should all obviously fit together. But when you look at it as a whole from a broader perspective, you should see that one image. And that one image should be that you are approvable, you are impactful. That's like the bottom line that we're looking for. But it's all about those details, because if you don't have the right puzzle pieces, then they're not going to be able to see that overall clear picture of how you are approvable. So like I said, these letters are just part of the overall picture, but they are very important and they do need to have like specific details in there. So again, you want to be talking about at least one or two main projects, maybe a third. It depends on the person. So it's kind of hard to give overall advice in this kind of a way because I'm talking to I don't know who right now is watching. So your application might vary, slightly, but this is obviously as a whole in general. So yeah, those are the work letters. You want to make sure that they're signed and dated. You want to have the person's contact information, email, phone number, address. Also would like to include the person's CV or resume if they have, or if they don't have that, or won't provide it, you can use like any sort of public facing document like their LinkedIn profile, or maybe they have a profile on the company page. Like I know on our firm, all of our attorneys have a bio on there, so you could use that because it describes their qualifications and what makes them qualified. Or if they have like a Google Scholar profile page, we might include that, or ResearchGate, something that shows that this person is, who you're claiming them to be, so that they have a little more, it's a little more solid to the officer that this person does make sense to talk about this person's, experience and whatnot. We also like to do an independent letter. I feel like that's very important. And that kind of letter really supports more of the prong 1 and prong 3, which again is not really supported by a letter. It kind of helps tie it together. Those prongs are really supported by research and things like that show that the government is interested in what you're doing, how, it has the same goals, that it has part of like you fit into the greater picture here of what the federal government is aiming to accomplish. But these independent letters help tie you specifically to that national impact. So usually in an independent letter, I like to have them, obviously you start off with the same thing, introduction, relationship to you, maybe how you met, or that you don't have any sort of, work related relationship, that sort of thing. Then I like to talk about what problems are there happening in your industry. What does that look like? What challenges are there? How are you, as a specific person in that industry, helping overcome these challenges? How are you pushing things forward? How are you going to help solve these problems, or help, in one way, make it easier to solve these problems? And then I like them to kind of just do like a basic overview, kind of what you would just see on someone's resume. So, very like high level review of like your qualifications, what makes you unique. Maybe you have a unusual combination of experience or degrees, diplomas, education experience, maybe certain things that are really prestigious in your industry that you would want to definitely emphasize and highlight, and make sure that the officer knows that they're prestigious and that they're unique. Because don't let the officer, don't assume the officer is going to make any of those connections. The officer is not in your industry. They don't know what's normal and what's not normal in your industry. So you have to tell them what's normal and what's not normal, and how you go beyond that, and how you are unique, and how you kind of stand out from others. Because it's not, it's not just visible on your resume to someone that's not in your field. Like, they're not going to know, oh, this award, oh, wow, that's really like impressive. Or they're going to say like, oh, okay, maybe that was just a pat on their back from the boss or something like that. They're not going to know if it's super amazing or if it's just normal and expected. So definitely want to make sure that you tell them that, throughout your application, and your independent letter is really a good place for that, to show them how you are unique, because that helps that third prong. That helps you overcome that balance test, where you're showing that you are unique, you are valuable, can benefit the United States, you can be impactful, you can do all of these things that are basically like the heart and soul of the NIW, and that your work really, your individual work, not just your field, it's not just great to say that, oh, I'm part of an innovative field. You as an individual have to be innovative and impactful. They're not evaluating AI. They're not evaluating healthcare. They're not evaluating software engineering or whatever it is that you're doing. They're evaluating you within that field. So it's really important to make sure that you make sure that they're clear on knowing your individual worth, not just your field or not just your company. That's another thing that people also kind of confuse. This is not tied to a job. This is not tied to your employer. It's tied to you. So, the fact that you work at Amazon or you work at Meta or you work at Google, like, all these super powerful companies, that in and of itself doesn't tell me that you are going to be impactful. Just because you're riding the coattails of your company, that doesn't prove anything to USCIS because it's not tied to Amazon. Amazon's not applying for an NIW. You are applying for an NIW. So it's really important to make sure that they realize that you as an individual have this impact, and it's not just your field. It's not just your industry. It's not just your company. It has to be you as an individual. And these letters really do kind of help create additional puzzle pieces for them to see that overall picture that you are impactful, that you can do these things, that you as a person can make a difference in the way that the NIW is looking for that. So I guess bottom line is, we talked about work references, independent references. I will talk about academic references briefly. This is not always a letter that I like to include, but we do if it makes sense. So if you are a recent grad, obviously if you're still in school, it can make sense to get an academic letter. So when I'm looking for who to sign an academic letter, I'm looking for a professor that you did a project with, that you did a publication with, that you did something. Because again, these letters can't be just specific, like broad. They have to be specific. So we're looking for a professor that can talk about something specific you've done. Not just something like, oh yes, they were a hardworking student. They had a great GPA, signed, Dr. Whoever. We're looking for them to say, oh, this person was a great student. They had a great GPA. And they also did this project that was really hard and impactful and, really showed how they stood apart from other students in the class or, from the school and things like that. So you're looking for, in that kind of a scenario. So if you're a recent grad, if you're still in school, and it has to be both, and you had a project or a thesis or a publication or some sort of activity with a professor that you can specifically talk about what your role was in this project, what the outcome of the project is, and then how this experience at the educational level can help you in the future go towards your proposed endeavor, because that's what we're all looking for. So proposed endeavor is future oriented. These letters are talking about things that you have done, but they're also showing what you have done in that you will likely do these things in the future, or that you're capable, you have the experience, you have the education, you have this, the skill set that's needed to do whatever it is that you're saying you're going to do that's going to impact America on the national level. So academic letter is not something that everyone always needs, but it does help certain people with certain profiles. I would say, if you're obviously an academic researcher, that would probably be something very important to get. But if you're, in AI or some sort of tech field and you graduated 10 years ago, it may not make sense for you. It may not make sense at all. And there are other kind of letters too. So if you are doing activities in the field outside of your job, and you have been a peer reviewer, or you did get an award, or you are a published person, getting a letter from someone that can talk about those activities is also a great letter to also get, just to kind of help emphasize that, because that's something that you'd want to highlight in your profile, that you are doing all of these other things that are showing that you have already been impactful. So therefore you will continue to be impactful. So, those kind of things obviously vary upon the applicant. Not everybody has these things to kind of highlight, but it is definitely good for the NIW if you do have these things to highlight, because that helps show how you are impactful beyond just your company. If you are presenting at conferences, maybe get a letter from the organizer and talk about how your presentation really stood out and was helpful, and how the audience received it, and like how it could kind of help move things forward. Anything that can show that you are helping to move the industry forward, imparting your wisdom to other professionals in the field, anything that makes you unique and stand out is something you absolutely want to highlight. So if there can be an additional letter, that letter may look different compared to the other letters. They might be shorter because you're not really talking maybe about as many things, or you're emphasizing things that it can just be kind of communicated, a little differently. But, if you can get, not just a certificate that you were there, but if you get like a letter from the organizer, if you presented someplace, that is really, emphasizing even more of what your impact is. It's not just like, oh, yes, I was there and presented. You're now telling the story of the impact of your presentation, of how it was received and how it was unique and how it maybe had a different angle than other professionals have in the field. And maybe someone think a little bit more critically or something. It's showing more results. So anything that can kind of help tie everything into that overall story that we're looking to tell in your application. And again, think of it as a puzzle, and you have all these little pieces, and all together, all of your pieces should have that one overall image of how you can be impactful and how you can be approved. So I guess we'll move over to questions now. I definitely have talked enough about reference letters. So if anyone has any questions about reference letters or just NIW in general, that would be great.
Ahmed asks, for EB-2 NIW, must I have a publication?
No, you don't have to have a publication. I mean, if you're a researcher and you don't have a publication, that might be a little bit different. But if you're not a researcher, then, if you're just like an industry, you can show your impact in a real world scenario. You don't have to show impact through a publication if it doesn't make sense for your field. But you would still have to show impact. So that's what we're looking for. You have to show impact beyond your employer. So that can be done in many different ways.
Do you provide assistance for drafting reference letters?
Yeah, so one of the first things we do is, we get a list of who you think you can get letters from. Then we, the attorney, I say we, but it's an attorney that looks it over. And we would strategize with you saying, these are our suggestions, who should write these work letters, who should write an independent letter, who can write a different letter, all strategized to your individual profile. And then once we talk with the client as to who this final list is from, we also figure out what their content can be. Then we write the letters for the client, and then the client gets to review it, tweak it if needed, send it out to the person. They can tweak it if needed, but sometimes it gets into trouble because sometimes people want to delete a lot of things, and that's really, we want to make sure that we say things in a certain way, but that's not often the case. Usually this person will just sign it as is, and then it's all ready and strategized as part of another puzzle piece of your application.
What are the options if the company is not willing to provide it on letterhead?
Yeah, so then a lot of the time people are okay with signing it as in a personal capacity, so that's without company letterhead, but they should still have, again, email, address, and phone number on there.
Just making sure I understand this. The independent reference is not familiar with you or your work till you approach them. Would the independent reference then say that they reviewed the candidate's resume and propose an endeavor and think that the candidate is well positioned to accomplish that?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the gist of it. We would say like I've had a chance to review the person's resume, and I can, resume, or if you have like publications, anything that you've done that's public facing as well, can be reviewed. So yeah, you would say like, I have no professional relationship with this person, but I've had a chance to review their resume and I'm familiar with the industry, because the independent letter really should come from someone as high of a job title as you can find, someone with as most prestige as you can find, because that person really should have a more commanding understanding of the overall industry itself and how someone like you can fit into that industry. So typically someone, again, with a higher job title, some sort of, great accomplishments, has a more commanding voice in that regard.
What kind of media is considered strong for NIW, or paid media like a PR release helpful?
Well, I gotta maybe unpack that a little bit. So, like, media, as far as, say that, you're working for a company and they have some sort of press release on a project or product or something that you've been working on, and that press release doesn't name you, it doesn't have to name you, but it helps tell the story of what the work project was and how it was maybe impactful, or like what the goals are. It helps support some of that work. But then you should definitely have third-party evidence, as well as potentially a reference letter tying you to that project that is mentioned in the press release. And as far as the paid aspect, I guess you're talking about if you pay someone to write about you, maybe, but that's definitely, I mean, as it doesn't really have too much weight to it because you're paying someone to do it. It's not like someone is doing it based upon your expertise or your reputation or something. If I'm paying someone to, give me an award, that doesn't really give value to the award, sort of a thing.
Is 7 reference letters too many?
We typically do like 3 to 4 reference letters for our NIWs. That's what's included in our price. We do occasionally have a client that will pay for extra letters beyond that, but we'll only do it if it makes sense, because you don't want each letter to say the same thing. If all 6 and 7 letters are talking about the same projects, they're covering the same aspects of your profile, that's really not what we're looking for. We're looking for the letters to talk about different things, different projects, different companies you've worked for. You want them all to bring their own merit. So it's not about the quantity as much as it is the quality of the letters, and that they're, that they all make sense and they're not just overlapping in content.
Does it make a difference to add academic letter if I am doing a part-time PhD along with my full-time job based in research? Would that add weight to my
Yeah.
application?
Yeah, I think that would make sense. So if someone is doing a part-time PhD alongside their regular job, definitely getting a letter as to how maybe your PhD will help you in the future once it is completed, help you reach your proposed endeavor. Of course, if there's any accomplishments you have already done through your PhD program, there's definitely some ideas of what that letter could look like, but I would have to, obviously see your individual entire profile to see how you can, create your own kind of puzzle pieces for that.
Hi, Helen. This first session, apologies, we already covered this. I was wondering whether the recommendation letter has to align with the proposed endeavor.
So everything aligns to your proposed endeavor. The proposed endeavor is the foundation of your application. So that is how you will make a difference in America. So how will you be impactful? What is your future plan? What does that look like? What kind of methods are you going to use, or technologies, techniques? What are your short-term goals, long-term goals? So everything that you submit for this application supports that proposed endeavor. So if you get a reference letter and say, if you're like I don't know, an AI tech person, and you get a letter because you were like the president of the, yearbook or something like that, that's not really related at all to what you're doing. So that letter doesn't really have any value. Every letter, every piece of evidence, every argument, all needs to support your proposed endeavor. So if there are things in your background that you have accomplished that are not at all even like slightly related to your proposed endeavor, then most likely should just not be part of your application.
How many reference letters are needed?
So we typically do about 3 to 4, but again, it's about quality, not quantity, and it's about making sure that nothing overlaps and everything brings its own merit to your application.
Have there been successful applications from individuals in the 25-28 age group? I have a few publications with a total of 10 citations and can secure a few strong reference letters. I'm just trying to understand what my chances are. Thanks for answering.
Yeah, so I mean, that's not really asking it in a way that makes sense for the NIW age, and whether you're new in your field or senior in your field or anything in between. That's not really what's measured here. We're measuring your impact. So there's plenty of young people that can still be impactful and have accomplished great things. And there's a lot of older people that have accomplished nothing. So, that's not really, age doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it. If you have publications and they're all related to the same topic, that's in a field of a national interest that can help further things in America. Those are all the things that kind of need to align in order to have this application be viable. So, age definitely doesn't have anything to do with it.
If I don't work directly with someone or cited my work by him or her, but we are both in the same field or working on similar topics, it's still possible to list them as a reference, provided they are familiar with my work and willing to provide one.
Yeah, so the independent recommender should absolutely be in your field as closely as possible to your specific niche. That way they're able to comment on the industry, they're able to comment to your uniqueness and your contributions and how you can help further America's goals and whatever it is that, your specific proposed endeavor is.
All right, that's all the questions.
All right, great. If anyone is watching on the recorded version, you could just send a comment or a DM and, we can follow up with that.
Oh, there's one last question.
Okay.
Can you please explain how a LOI letter of interest?
Letter of intent, maybe?
Intent should look like? Contract option should be included in the description, or is it optional? Do you have any template for letter of intent to share?
We don't have any templates at all because everything is so individually done to each applicant. But if you have a letter of intent, like, I can see that if it's especially from someone that is outside of America looking to come to America, and you're showing the officer that there is a need for someone like you with your skills, that you can get a job that is furthering your proposed endeavor. What was the second half of that question? Sorry,
Contract option should be included.
I guess if you're talking about if there's an actual employment offer there, I mean, you can just include an employment offer in and of itself. It doesn't have to maybe be in the letter per se. I guess it would have to depend on your combination of like what kind of evidence could be provided.
All right, there are a couple more questions, but do you want to take a couple more questions, or do you?
Yeah, we can take like one more.
Considering an individual who holds the rank of senior lecturer, possesses more than 7 years of experience in teaching and academic research, and has authored around 10 peer-reviewed publications, what are the realistic chances of securing approval for a national interest waiver from USCIS? In particular, how might their academic background and research output influence the adjudication process?
Okay, so first, teaching in and of itself is not a great proposed endeavor, but since it's coupled with research, would be definitely relying on the research aspect because that's where the impact lies. Because the court case matter of Janisar basically was about showing how teaching in a classroom is not impactful to the national level, but the research aspect is. So I know a lot of professors do both. They teach and they research. So for NIW purposes, most of the time when I have someone like that, we emphasize the research aspect and the continued future research aspect. So, I can just give like general advice. I don't know anything about, your specific profile, but, for anyone listening, we do free assessments on our website. Submit your individual application. It's just like a resume and a couple questions, and we'll review it and get back to you as to how we think your chances of approval would be for NIW if you're ready, or maybe you need some additional profile building, or maybe we need a conversation about what it is that you're doing and that sort of thing. So we'll give you some feedback for free on our website for both EB-1A and EB-2 NIW. So definitely, to give any sort of tailored information, would need to see that personal, stuff.
All right. All right, that was the last question.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.